You are listening to a recording from the Cooperating to Build a Better Nova Scotia conference in Halifax, a celebration marking the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives.
Okay, so we are going to start, and welcome to everybody for coming. It's relatively a small group, so I think we will find it very, very engaging. We can keep it as informal as possible so that we can share and learn from one another. So we have 90 minutes, and we have a very distinguished group of people to share with us here. And so what I'm going to do, I will quickly introduce our speakers and set the stage for the conversation. Each of them will have 15 minutes, and then we will have much time to entertain questions and answers. So today here and on my left is Ms. Sonja Novkovic, and she's a professor at St. Mary's University, and she also manages the MBA Management of Cooperatives program, and she has also been a chair, kind of research chair on the measuring cooperative difference, and she has an enormous experience in working in this sector. And also on my right is Greg Cameron, who is an assistant professor of political science and rural community studies at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. Prior to joining the college in 2006, he taught political science at the University of Asmara, Eritrea in Northeast Africa for over 4 years, from 2002 to 2006. During the late 1980s and a good part of the 1990s, he worked as a CUSO cooperant in Tanzania, primarily with the Tanzania cooperative movement. His research in East Africa focused on cooperatives, rural policy, food security, developmental stage, and democratization transitions. At the Rural Research Center of the Dalhousie Agricultural Faculty, he is currently building a research program on the shifts, transitions, and tensions in contemporary Atlantic Canada as they relate to food sovereignty, cooperative development, federal and provincial agricultural policy, as well as broader issues around relocalization transitions in OECD countries. I hope you guys will not forget, because I just want to introduce them before they speak, and then you will keep in mind. And then I have our third speaker will be Mr. Mike Turner, who has had the wonderful opportunity of working as a financial planner for the Valley Credit Union for the past 12 years. He has been in the financial services industry for 17 years. Mike enjoys, oh, he's still here, I thought he disappeared. Mike enjoys helping member owners reach their financial goals and achieve their retirement plans. He has spent some time in Africa volunteering for the Canadian Cooperative Association in Uganda and Ghana. This partnership has allowed Mike to be able to spread the success of CCA and its development programs to various organizations in Nova Scotia. Mike and his spouse Nancy enjoy traveling and spending time at their cottage at Trout Lake, Nova Scotia. He feels that he has been blessed with the people he has met in Africa, and the hope that they have for the future. Very interesting, because I'm from Africa and I have all these people with a lot of experience from Africa. So before I ask Sonja to speak, I will just set the stage. I don't know if you had the opportunity to read the overview of the workshop. So this workshop, we are going to talk about Nova Scotia cooperatives and the global context. So, and as an introduction, we think that the advent of the internet combined with the influence of globalization and capitalism propelled large-scale transnational and multi-billion-dollar corporations as the drivers of economic growth around the world. However, history reminds us that cooperatives have always been there. They have always been in the rural and coastal communities of Nova Scotia, helping fishing and farming families to mobilize, work together, and create vibrant local economies. So even in Southeast Asia, cooperatives have always been there, helping rural and landless families to enterprise successfully. Cooperatives are empowering communities in Latin America and helping communities to generate incomes and improve access to health across several African countries. And so around that, for example, you know, in Europe, cooperatives manage 99% of Sweden's dairy production, 95% of Japan's rice harvest, and even in Canada, 75% of Western Canada's green oil seed output. They were also absent to report bankruptcy and seek capitalization. They were only absent during the global financial crisis we had to report bankruptcy and seek capitalization in 2008. Cooperatives have grown locally and globally. So for example, in the UK in 2008 and 2009, when the UK economy contracted, for example, in 2008 by negative 1.1%, the cooperative economy grew by 5.4%. That's pretty huge. So there are, however, questions about the ability to concurrently pursue economic growth and remain committed to the aspirations of grassroots families. And this is what the conversation is going to be about, partially. So we have Desjardins growing well. Are they paying too much billion-dollar salary to their people and they've forgotten about rural people? We have the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh that has grown big. Have they forgotten the rural people, women who were learners that they were working with? So this workshop will draw on the experience of these people to share with you, and I now give the chance to Sonja.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I will happily let you know that I know nothing about the subject, so this will be a conversation that I'm hoping to engage with you. The subject being the title up there, the potential policy connections with cooperative development and multifunctionality in agriculture. So I'm thrilled to hear that we do have somebody who has looked at policy, and I'll be enlightened here, like the rest of our audience, hopefully, with what is actually happening in the policy arena. But where I'm coming from is I have a long history of research of cooperative theory, or theory of cooperatives in economics, I should specify. So I come from the economics background, and cooperatives in economics have been treated in a way, obviously labeled by the neoliberal and neoclassical economic understanding of how the world works, and cooperatives don't fit into that world. So the economic theory that we've had over the past 50, 60 years pretty much has been one of the reasons why cooperatives are so marginalized in the academia, right? Because either they don't matter, because they just do the same thing, it's just a matter of ownership, so we all want profit, it's just a matter of who gets it in the end. Either it's treated like that, or they're treated, again, this was my thesis, master's, PhD, and on I went. The theory of worker cooperatives where actually each, well, those co-ops apparently want to maximize income per worker and therefore will lay off each other when the times are good so that fewer can share more. So I don't have to tell you, if you've ever seen a co-op or walked into one, that that's not how they work. Anyway, so this is what my background is. So I'm really the theorist that got sucked into the reality of cooperatives by teaching in the master's program that was mentioned a couple of times, where actually our students are in co-ops, so they understand the real world, and therefore the theories we present to them have to make sense to them. So this is how, you know, we go back and forth trying to make sense of this. So I'm coming from that, and then I'll explain to you, you know, where I was going with this when I hit this agricultural issue. So again, please, I'm here to learn. I hope you understand that, so you won't be harsh on me here if I say something that isn't right. So here it is. We have just come from Quebec, from the Imagine 2012 Economics Conference, where we have heard people in ecological economics who are calling for a paradigm shift, a change in economics as we know it. And the reason for it is that we're in the ecological overshoot, as Bill Rees, one of our presenters from UBC, you know, presented to us, and he has done this work. He's been doing this work since 1970s approximately, warning since then, you know, that we're hitting a point of no return in terms of ecological impact and environmental impact that we're having with the economic paradigm that we all live in. So we've also heard Peter Victor, who is an economist at the University of Toronto, talking about the degrowth movement, and that's growing, by the way. There's an international association for degrowth of the economy, because not just the steady state growth, where we couldn't be growing the economy the way we've been, looking at GDP growth, and that's the only indicator we care about. Now there are calls and understandings that we need to not only slow it down, but also again, engage in degrowing the advanced economies and allowing less advanced or less developed economies to actually grow and reach a scale. So anyway, so there's this work in economics that we don't teach, unfortunately, too often, unless you teach ecological economics. And anyway, so the conversations have been going around that. And the financial overshoot that followed, and we've had John Fullerton presenting to us, but George Soros himself, the guy who actually got his riches from the hedge fund and the use of the current financial system, who has been warning since he has become rich, basically, and nearly destabilized the British pound, famously back in the 80s, was it? Who has been warning that playing by the rules in the financial markets are not going to help anybody, because playing by the rules and enriching one person or a few people are going to destabilize the rest of the economy. And he's been, among others, supporting the idea of a Tobin tax, which is a tax on transfers of finance, financial, and again, so this is not unknown, and it's been around for a while, but we have just recently, freshly heard about this stuff, and it got me thinking about the theory that we have. This is from Bill Rees, who said, this is one of his slides from his presentation, where he's basically saying that we need, there's a challenge, should we even try to accept it, that the economic policy emphasis must shift from efficiency and growth, and that's where we are now, so getting bigger, toward equity and development. This is qualitative improvement, getting better. So development, again, this is something not foreign in development economics either, that growth doesn't mean development. That income increase may be one component, and in the Human Development Index, that is one component of a measure of development, but development is getting better. And then he goes on to say that the underpinning values of society must shift from competitive individualism, greed, and narrow self-interest, that's what we teach in economics, toward community cooperation and our collective interest in survival. This is what we don't teach in economics. We were in that conference talking about the role for cooperatives in this paradigm shift, right? So if we accept that we need to change the way we look at the economy, and the challenge is big because this is really going after capital. Nobody is politically willing or ready to go there yet. That's our problem, I think, our common problem on this planet, right? That there's no political will to go there. But if we all understand that, yes, that's where we need to go, we need an economy not focused on profits. Cooperatives are a business model, one of a whole diverse world of different business models that offer this no focus on profits, which doesn't mean that they don't make a profit, but that's not their raison d'etre. They don't exist to maximize return on investment. They're guided by the ICA principles and values, and this is so underreported. Even when we teach about cooperatives, we don't stress this enough, that those ICA principles and values are in fact the bare bones of what makes cooperatives different. And that's what makes them different, not just from investor-owned companies, that's what makes them different from other social enterprises. Cooperatives are a social movement, they have the international institutions, but they have the principles and values very similar to fair trade in the trade world, where you know what those rules are and what you should be doing. So co-ops have those rules and regulations. Rules, I should say, not regulations, because legally they're not asked to do all of those. But only 3, I guess, entered the law, mainly. They're community-owned and governed. So there is that advantage in the context of community development and self-ownership and self-guidance of communities. So cooperatives have a big role to play in this paradigm shift if we're interested in it. But now my world looking for an economic model of co-ops, because again, what's the word, econometricians or applied economists work is they have a model and then they go proving or disproving the hypothesis based on that model. The model hasn't been there, is our problem. Okay, we don't have a model in economics that they can actually go and test that's sensible. We have one that doesn't make any sense, and that's why the entire 50 years of literature is about testing those models that actually are no good to begin with, right? So this is where I'm hopeful we'll have that model that will make sense, and that's what I was looking for. And I think I have one, but it will require a lot of work, and I was hoping that I will come here with a little bit more work done, but got distracted a little bit in Quebec, so I'm blaming Tom here. Anyway, so this is where I'm, where I'll spend my next 6 months hopefully trying to figure out how this model is going to work. So what the model that I have in mind is, it is actually, it came from agriculture economics. So that's where it got me, okay, agriculture, they have something going. And what it does is it combines, it's a behavioral economics model, it combines the dual productivity, the joint production function. So there are two things happening at the same time. And they use it, for example, for farmer stewardship. So, would a farmer actually take care of the land, and would a farmer at their own cost, at less profitability, would they actually take care of the land voluntarily, right? And if you actually have this behavioral model, then you can test whether in fact they do it, even though they know it will be at the detriment of the money that they will make. And so pretty much at this point where the testing of the model has been going is to actually prove that yes, they do it, right? But we don't have any use of it yet. And in co-ops we kind of know, yep, that's why people are in co-ops, because they have the social side of them, and they want to be in a collective that actually is maximizing our common well-being and not just my own, right? So we'll improve ourselves moving forward together, even though it may be at the cost to me personally today. But so these kinds of dualities exist in cooperatives, and so I basically actually wrote a short paper on this, saying that cooperatives are fulfilling the economic and the social function. They're seeking the balance between the two for a higher quality outcome. And this is like a quality product that you have in the end. The quality being that it's fairly traded, that it is socially, or ecologically safe and sound, and so on. And they embed the social in the economic, or internalize the externalities, as we like to say in economics, right? So externalities are unwanted outcomes. They can be positive or negative, and cooperative model internalizes them because it includes the multi-stakeholders or multiple interests, and social interest is one of those. So this is again what I was looking at, but then I stumbled upon this model where in fact this dual motives theory is the one I was writing about. So it is about balancing ego, selfish interests, versus other interests or other motivated interests. It has a joint production function where these two things go together. They cannot be separated. They don't go one without the other. So you do social good while you're pursuing your own interest as well, and you need to balance them as you go. So it's a back and forth kind of thing. And we hear this in economics literature, that's all the time mentioned. You have the business component, you have the social component, how do you balance the two? So examples, again, I mentioned farmers and land stewardship. They also have some examples of recycling, the same idea. Again, the literature on agriculture and multifunctionality then just presented itself to me, which is the only place where multifunctionality is in fact used. Meaning that there is a joint production of commodity and non-commodity outputs. So by planting, you actually are, so by producing food, you're also producing non-commodity outputs, and I'll list them in a minute. And the fact that some of non-commodity outputs are actually externalities or public goods. So those are the two components defined by OECD to be characteristics of multifunctionality. The non-commodity outputs that agriculture actually produces are impacts on the environment, social impacts like rural viability, food safety, national food security, the welfare production of animals, and and so on. The welfare of animals, sorry. And so that again drew me to the literature that OECD has, for the most part, on this definition of jointness, or finding out, are these things actually being co-produced? And they talk about, for example, that it is not so clear that agricultural production is in fact having a side effect on rural communities, as in developing rural communities necessarily. So there is that literature again that I'm hoping I'll be enlightened later from you who have read this stuff a bit more than I have. But then you look at the policy objectives, right? So on the one hand, we have these cooperatives that actually are entities that do two things together. And on the other hand, we have agriculture that we know is also co-producing two things, right? So I'm thinking, okay, could we actually support agricultural development, and then they will do it, they will internalize it anyway, right? So instead of pushing policies on agriculture itself and saying, okay, you do, whatever, environmentally sound production and we'll give you money to do it, could we support cooperatives? And they will, with their own bylaws and internal regulations, in fact, do it anyway, right? So could this be an indirect policy that in fact, but then we need to monitor that. We need to ensure that yes, they do that they're not fake co-ops who are actually not going to deliver, right? So that's where I'm going with this thing. So then we need co-ops to get their act together and have internal reporting systems, because it's in their interest, isn't it? If there really are co-ops, as we all know, we would like to actually show the world that we do things better. And it's in our interest to do that. And actually some scorecards have been developed and other means to actually show that, yes, we do things differently. So by, again, our Nova Scotia government supporting co-op development and asking co-ops to report, yes, we've done this, that, and the other, in fact, we may do two things, because, again, co-ops will deliver the social angle of it, right? And if they're in agriculture, they will do the other side as well, the food production. But with principles of cooperation and values of cooperation, you're also going to have food safety, food security, you will keep them local, all those things. And they will engage in international trade if, again, the measures of the impact on ecology, the footprints are where they should be. So if you measure the triple bottom line and the kinds of scorecards that they do now, in fact, you can keep control and shift that economic paradigm, if you will. So I think there is something there to have a conversation about. This is pretty much where I'm trying to go with this. And how exactly it would work, how exactly this can be done, I'm not sure. But, there are other people who may have ideas. I think that we should combine the two. So currently, I'll just go through my slides in that 1 minute that I do have. Currently, as I said, there is this jointness debate in OECD, but policy in Canada, let me just see. Policy in Canada, from what I could see here, is shifting from pushing markets on agriculture into actually looking at social outcomes and environmental outcomes, right? Co-op development, I'm saying here, is about reducing transaction costs for agricultural producers, reaching scale economies, growing through networks. So I'm basically just listing the advantages of the cooperative model in this context of agricultural production as well. But then we would need, again, for policy for co-op development, we would need to monitor delivery on non-commodity outputs and look at service of developing actually cooperative indicators, but also using cooperatives as service to agriculture rather than having the government delivering those programs. If you can actually have co-ops develop in that area and produce services, research and development, innovation, and all other kinds of things. So I threw a few ideas here, and I hope it made sense. And I'm looking forward to a conversation. Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker will be Craig Cameron.
Yeah. I don't have a PowerPoint, but this paper will be published on the conference proceedings. The paper that my colleague and I wrote, Louise Hanovan, she's with the Ecology Action Center. She was my graduate student at the Rural Research Center. We worked together on this paper, and so this is basically what we have in a nutshell. The paper we wrote follows the spirit of the Quebec summits in that we are trying to think beyond the current economic paradigm and moving to some kind of human-centered, ecologically sensitive paradigm. And we also, this is also in the spirit of the call by the Canadian Cooperative Alliance to, or association, sorry, to create new models of cooperation and to talk about organizational innovation. So what the paper is really focusing on today is rural cooperation. Okay, so how to rethink rural cooperation in the 21st century. And the research we did was with the cooperative, Atlantic Cooperative Councils, some partaking in the round tables at Truro. Tom, you were there as well. The Grey Literature and other interviews, and some of the students I worked with in my rural studies course, community economic development. So it's a potpourri of things. The main paper that we'll be uploading covers the general trends in agriculture, the issues confronting the movements, the cooperative movement in Atlantic Canada, in the various agricultural subsectors, such as marketing, services, supply, and production. And we are looking at what impact cooperatives can make in terms of achieving greater food security and what their capacity is to partake in a wider transformation in the rural areas. As part of a broader, as Joseph mentioned, my research is also about, not in this paper, but about relocalization questions. So not just about the rural economy as well, but the broader national economy. But of course, this paper is about the rural elements. So this, what I'm going to talk about is the framework of this paper briefly, a brief summary of the research results, especially with the cooperative councils, the Atlantic Canada. Then we're going to look at a business model that the Nova Scotia Atlantic Cooperative Council talked about, a concept called the Fundi Farms Cooperative, a 10,000 acre food cooperative, and some of the other spin-off models from this business concept. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a little bit about foreign models that can help us think through some of these transition questions. In particular, the ALBA countries in South America. Okay, so that's Cuba, Venezuela, and the other Latin American countries that are trying to build an alternative to neoliberalism in the hemisphere here. Okay, so my focus in this particular presentation is about the possibility of establishing farming cooperatives in Atlantic Canada and in Western countries more broadly speaking. In my younger days, I went off to work in Tanzania with the cooperative movements, and I was always fascinated with the possibility of agriculture producer cooperatives in the global south, in Nicaragua, Mozambique, Tanzania, China, joint farming, collective production. It was a socialist strategy, of course, and that's why I think I left Canada in those days, because I was very interested in cooperatives. But you know, Scotsburn and the other cooperatives I'd come across in Canada just didn't cut it for me in terms of a more radical transformation. And then years passed, and I worked in Tanzania and so forth, as Joseph introduced my background. And then I started thinking, with all the changes that have started happening in the West since I've come back from overseas work, I thought, why not have agriculture, well, farming cooperatives, I call them agriculture producer cooperatives. Why can't we have APCs in the West, in the heartlands of neoliberalism? I thought, that seems like a fantastical idea, because even looking at basic policy right now in Canada, we're moving from any remnant of state support to a total open corporate market system. So then how could even APCs be conceived of in this context, this climate that we're living in? And well, I thought, yeah, that's true, but first of all, we have the 2000, Tom talked about this at the beginning, the 2008 economic shocks that show that our system is pretty unstable in a lot of ways, and this instability probably is going to continue indefinitely. We have the decline of, related to this crack in our neoliberal model, we have the decline of domestic food systems. We have outright attacks on any remnants of state-supported agriculture right now, such as the Canadian Wheat Board. Supply management is next. If you listen to the media, they're lining up to get rid of supply management as well. And the third issue that I thought made APCs applicable in a Western context, with all this, despite all this economic turbulence in a corporate-dominated model, is that a lot of countries, for the first time in history, the OECD countries will have less than half of global GDP. There's other rising powers, okay, with other national development models and experiences. And I was thinking, well, South America is among those, and they have their own experiences with cooperatives as well as production cooperatives, including in farming. So I thought for that reason as well, it's perhaps incumbent upon us to study what they've done. So I threw that question out in the paper. What would an agriculture producer cooperative effect be for our local food production and rural empowerment in the Canadian context? And so with this question in mind, we brought that to the Atlantic Cooperative Councils through some phone interviews and discussions and so forth. What our results showed, and this is a very brief summary, it shows that there's an acute awareness in the Atlantic cooperative movement in the agricultural sector of the challenges facing agriculture. From the national to the local movement, from CCA down to the cooperative councils and down to the primary level, there's concern about farm and land loss, how policies geared to the big players, the lack of critical infrastructure for local food, that growing forward too, the current federal policy is going just to deepen and accelerate these trends towards export markets, bioscience, and so forth. We also found that while there's a greater recognition at the level of the cooperative movements here in Atlantic Canada of the importance of small and niche and alternative farming, such as CSAs, community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, organic, fair trades, food security, the problems remain that policies still are inadequate to actually build on those kind of incipient movements or counter movements in the cooperative and social sector movement, more broadly speaking. We looked at the established cooperative sectors, marketing, supply, services. They seem to be doing okay, particularly the supply management. But again, as I've just mentioned, they're kind of marked for something else, right, for dismantlement if things pan out the way certain forces in our system are hoping they will. So a lot of these sectors, these subsectors of agriculture are still under threat by this deepening of this neoliberal corporate model. And so the question is, how do we reboot local food systems? So it was at the round table in Truro, and again, Tom was there. I met Fred Pierce, and I was thinking about this. What does the cooperative movement want to talk about this issue? And I met Fred Pierce at the Truro round table when the federal government was going through looking for revamping the cooperative policy. And he said, yeah, I have this idea of setting up a 10,000 acre mixed farm in outside of Truro. 10,000 acres. And he said that's the only way, if we really want to get serious, if we want to reboot local food production, that's how we have to do it. Like 10,000 acres. Forestry, blueberry, cranberry, carrots, cattle. You know, he had in mind 5 10,000 acre farms throughout Nova Scotia. Right? Wow. I thought that's pretty heavy. So Louise and I, we actually did a little business plan for his idea of this big 10,000 acre farm. It was 10,000 acre, 100,000 per member contribution, and 100 members on that. So, so what we did was, we didn't do a full business plan, but we looked at the land question. Can you even get 10,000 acres under one cooperative entity? And so we looked at that more closely. What we found was it'd be very difficult to do that because most land in the private market sector comes up in 200 or 300 acre allotments. Maybe forest, crown land, or forestry you can get in the private sector, but not prime agricultural land, which doesn't come up. And it's in areas where there's dairy production, the percentage, the cost per acre is higher than, say, in areas where farming's gone out. And there's lots of unused land. That's the paradox, right, of course, is that there's lots of land that's gone out of use, say around the Powersboro area, that's become idle within this the situation we're in. We also looked at, aside from getting land, how would that work? Even if you could get, say, well, if you couldn't get 10,000, say you could get something to make the effort viable, say 1,000 acres. How would you actually set that up? Who would own the land? 5 minutes? Thank you, Joseph. So we looked at that. You know, what would the ownership be between the cooperative and the individual farmers? Trying to flesh that out a little bit. And then we looked at also beyond that particular business plan, we looked at other options, and we looked at community land trusts as a viable option, agricultural easements, and leasing crown lands. And there has been some talk in New Brunswick around the possibility of group farming on crown lands as well in New Brunswick. One of my students, he talked about a moshav, so he was thinking about an Israeli kind of kibbutz model, actually on the town level in Nova Scotia. He looked at moshav in Great Village as a possible way forward. Other ideas my students had: yard sharing, vertical integration of local business, and multifunctional initiatives like alpaca, bison. The question with multifunctional, is it still within a corporate market, or is it in a transitioning market model out of this paradigm, right? And so finally, I want to bring in the foreign model. So the movement, aside from this little discussion with Fred Pierce we had at the round table, in our interviews, there wasn't a lot of awareness about the possibility of agricultural producer cooperatives being set up. It really wasn't on the radar of the movement. And I think the movement should take that on as something to at least talk about. The Latin American context is very interesting because they actually have a lot of progressive activities. First of all, these countries I just named earlier, they've set up an alternative trade bloc to NAFTA called ELBA, Bolivarian Alliance for our Americas. They prioritize food sovereignty, comparative advantage on many things aside from tropical produce. So they're kind of a counterpoint to NAFTA. At the community level, for instance, in Venezuela, there's fleshing out of this cooperative principle of concern for community, where community and cooperatives at the local level have to have mutual stewardship of each other. That cooperatives can't just be a group of 10 people engaging in corporate activities, not really thinking about the community. And I do think we have that problem with some of our agricultural cooperatives here in that context. So that's another lesson I felt could be learned. And finally, the issue of politics. Okay, that's a big one, right? I think the movement, and you touched on it, Sonja, the movement has to get more political. It has to take on, it has to look at the corporate sector. It has to think about how government, or the states, to get more theoretical, begins helping the cooperative movement in this broader transition. And that's what also the Latin American context can teach us, because they do have political parties in place committed, at least in theory. I don't want to defend the models, there's a lot of flaws, but at least it's on the historical agenda. It's a narrative if nothing else. And it's an interesting model of governments being held in check by social movements, trying to get away from the neoliberal corporate model into something else. And I think that would speak to our situation in terms of not siloing the transition to an alternative model, not talking about just rural versus urban, not talking just about economics, transforming economics. It has to also be about politics. And I think that's one of the things that the Latin American context can teach us. Electoral reforms, working with the government, working in the states, working around it, underneath it, those are things that we have to kind of discuss in our own context. Otherwise, things are going to get worse. That's my view on it. All right, that's it.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, so now it's, yeah.
Great.
Oh, they're starting to flee. Anyone wants to leave can go now. No, I'm just kidding. While Joseph's setting up my PowerPoint. Yeah, that's it. Right? Okay. Yeah.
In here?
Yeah. Yeah, just get that on a slideshow if we could, yeah.
Oh, okay. And I should put it on a slideshow.
Well, we're running out of time, I guess, so my name's Mike Turner and I come from the Valley Credit Union down in the lovely Annapolis Valley. I'm wearing my scarf that the Ghanaian Cooperative Association gave me on my last day in Ghana in February. And I'm wearing it because it was a wonderful gift and I was thankful to have spent time there. And maybe I'm wearing it because it reminds me of how bloody hot it was there, because the day I got this scarf it was 38 and the humidity was about 98. We were in a room about this size with 3 times as many people and no air conditioning. But we did, and we had just eaten some very spicy rice and chicken, which was a local meal. But I'm going to vary from what the 2 previous speakers have talked about. Any of the last 2 years I spent some time in Uganda and some time in Ghana with the Canadian Cooperative Association, but my role was to help beginning credit unions establish some concepts and business practices and board of governances. But we did run into some small cooperatives there, farmers cooperatives, but most of these communities in Ghana and Uganda are just, the farmers are trying to sustain themselves and their family. Land ownership is still a big deal, and they do have it for a reason, but it's basically so that they can survive and have enough food to eat. So very little machinery in these countries. It's all done by hand and normally all done by the family. So in varying from the theme of economics, I met a young lady in Ghana this winter, and she impressed me. And so my story today is going to be based on her meeting me. So, and my dear old dad used to say, behind every man there's a good woman. And I figured he should know because he outlived 3 spouses. So, that certainly is the case in Ghana and most other countries in Africa. Women are an integral part of the family unit, and they contribute greatly to the income and the very existence of the family. My story this afternoon is about an 18-year-old girl by the name of Elizabeth Azakara, who grew up in a small village 30 kilometers outside the northern city of Tamale. Elizabeth's life and upbringing is a very typical that most rural Ghanaian women who struggle to better themselves in an environment that is very often unforgiving. The title of this small, short presentation is The Walking Women of Ghana, and it's told through the eyes of Elizabeth. My first memories are of me strapped to the back of my mother, who always seemed to be walking. My mother was the main provider for my father, was often away working in the city to help provide for the income we needed to survive. My mother's day started early in the morning as soon as the sun came up. She would walk miles to get firewood in order to have wood for the day's cooking. I never quite realized how she carried me on her back and yet carried a large load of dry firewood on her head. Walking was the only way we had to get the things we needed. Walking to get charcoal, walking to get water at the community well, walking to wash the clothing, walking to dig yams and other vegetables. In the dry season, it was often 40 to 50 degrees centigrade, and in the rainy season, the mud was unbearable. In Ghana, you begin to walk as soon as you are able, usually 11 to 12 months of age. It was no different for me. As soon as I turned 11 months, I was expected to walk on my own. Of course, my older brothers and sisters were in charge, but I was expected to behave and walk for myself. When I turned 4 years old, I began to walk for water and firewood. My whole day was spent walking with a purpose in order to keep my 7 brothers and sisters from going hungry. God acts in mysterious ways, and a new Catholic school was built only 5 kilometers from my village when I was 6. I now was fortunate enough to be able to go to school. What a great privilege. Walking the 5 kilometers each way in all sorts of weather was not a hardship, but a great adventure every day. Mind you, my other chores were still there after school, but school was my safety net. It gave me all the things that were missing in my local little village. But in Africa, this all ends at an early age, usually at age 15 unless you have wealthy parents. My school days were finished. I was expected to go to work and earn an income for the family. There were no local jobs, so the only place to go was the city of Tamale. I had many jobs at first until I noticed the street vendors selling things to people in cars and buses. With some financial help from my parents, I began a career on the streets of Tanaway. I walked the busy streets of the city from early morning to late at night, selling everything from matches to dried fish. I was a good vendor, and I saved my money every day and sent the rest home to my family. I walked many kilometers daily. Heat, torrential downpours, sandstorms, pollution, traffic, loud car horns, sickness, nothing stopped me from walking. I needed to be able to walk in order to sell my goods. Every day I walked past a small storefront building called a credit union. Many women would go in and out daily, and finally an older vendor told me about the credit union and how you could save your money in a good, safe environment. I joined that small credit union. Once I became a saver, I was encouraged to expand my business. I noticed the rich people would often buy fresh fruit over the other things the street vendors offered. I applied for and got a small loan in order to change my business. Business became very good. I paid back my loan and I eventually had enough money to have my own fresh fruit stall in the local market. Hard work and encouragement from the credit union was helping me become more successful. No, life has not been easy for me and my family. It is not easy for most people in Ghana. The annual income for most Ghanaians is approximately $650 Canadian annually. The life expectancy is around 56 for both men and women. The infant mortality rate is huge. In northern Ghana, where I'm from, 1 in 3 children do not make it to the age of 7. We have very large families for a reason. We need them to be able to work. My fruit stall is growing and I have 4 women walking and working for me now. I know the future will be better. I know there is hope. Tomorrow I will walk no more, for I am getting a loan from my small local credit union to buy my own bicycle. Tomorrow I will ride to the market and to work. Tomorrow I will ride to night classes at the university. Tomorrow I will ride to my new job at the credit union. Tomorrow. And I had no idea. When you're visiting these countries, you only have a small taste of what the locals go through, but this young lady touched me. And for any of you that are fortunate to travel to some of these countries and maybe get involved with the Canadian Cooperative Association, you get out of it a lot more than you give. But as we talk about cooperatives in Nova Scotia, these families are cooperatives in themselves. They've learned that without the strength of the family, or the mother, often in these cases, they wouldn't survive. So really, the credit union there, and there are credit unions, and to see some of these credit unions in some of these, like Kampala, or Accra, or Uganda, or Kabali, they're nothing but brick holes in the wall with a guard. And like I saw we were working in the middle of northern Ghana. It was about 40 degrees, and they did have electricity. And this older lady she probably looked older than she was. They encourage in these small credit unions savings boxes. They would be like big banks. They look like ammunition things, but they have a lock on them. And she has a key and the credit union has a key. Well, this older woman had taken a bus ride of 40 minutes in the heat to bring a deposit to the credit union, because the credit union advertises that it's safe to keep the money there. And she came into the manager's office and opened it up. There was an equivalent of $2 American in there. But she was saving. And they save for the darndest thing, but most of these countries believe in education, and the biggest loans are loans for education to a private school, because sometimes their own government schools aren't good enough. But these pictures, and I've never been the picture taker in my family because I have a lovely wife that loves to take pictures, but I couldn't get enough of these pictures, and certainly African women are proud. You can often see them. They didn't want you to take their picture. They didn't want you to watch them working in those hardships. But I mean, maybe we Nova Scotians can learn from these Africans that if we do work together and have the cooperative spirit, that we can be successful. So thank you very much, and I'm glad that Joseph and I